It was already 10 o'clock at the night, so Jacob was surprised by Noah's request. "What South Atlantic Dragon Palace?" Walter asked in bafflement. "Oh, it's a popular video game." Jacob quickly came up with an explanation. "Okay." Walter nodded. He was not familiar with the games that young people played these days, so he didn't think too much about it and retired to his room, asking the two to not stay up too late. "Are you coming or not?" Noah asked again. "Okay, I'll go with you." Jacob had no choice but to agree. If he refused, he was afraid that Noah would blurt out more unusual words to unsuspecting people. It was fortunate that he was a little kid, and it would be okay for him to talk nonsense as long as he didn't show his cultivation techniques. "Snowflake, let's go!" Noah ordered Snowflake, that trotted back to his feet cheerfully. Once they were out of the house, Noah waved his hand and created a red energy sphere around himself, Jacob, and Snowflake. Under his feet, a disc-shaped treasure appeared and lifted Jacob and Snowflake. Noah didn't have great cultivation strength, but he possessed treasures that were rare to find in the world. Any treasure he dumped would cause a fierce fight among the middle-tier sects on and above Fifth Heaven. This flight treasure was made by Noah himself, and he had not even given it a name. This disc looked ugly, but it could fly as fast as those supreme treasures. If the array formations were the engine of this flight treasure, then the nature essence Noah injected into it was the key to its ignition. The force that drove the treasure was the essence around it. Although the essence on the land was sparse, it was limitless. The flight treasure had dozens of powerful essence absorption array formations on it, and they allowed this treasure to absorb the essences from nature automatically. Therefore, its speed was fast. Before Jacob could say anything to Noah, the disc began to fly toward the south swiftly. If an ordinary flight treasure was a regular small car, then this flight treasure was an F1 race car. Jacob saw the scenes around him pass by in the blink of an eye, and the city became a vague spot of light in the distance. Standing on the disc-shaped treasure, Jacob didn't feel any wobbling. Snowflake yawned and began to sleep at his foot. "Don't worry about flying off course. I set the direction and distance, and it will land automatically when we arrive," Noah said proudly before tossing a mat onto the disc and sitting down to cultivate. "This ugly flight treasure even has GPS? This kid is annoying, but his skills in making treasures are amazing." Jacob looked down at the boy, who wasn't even on the 3rd level yet, and thought. Noah could literally rely on his treasures to carry him through life. When the gray flight treasure traveled over a group of desolate mountains and flew above an ocean, Jacob felt like only about a few minutes had passed. He looked around and found that the surrounding area was full of rocky mountains. Instead of big cities, there were only a few small towns in the area, and it was quite desolate compared with the populated and wealthy land in the North Atlantic Dragon Clan's territory. The flight treasure slowed down. Noah opened his eyes and pointed his arm to the ocean, and the treasure strengthened the red energy sphere before submerging into the sea. Snowflake was woken up by the sound, and it immediately stood up, looking around with its innocent eyes. Outside the energy sphere were water and ocean creatures. As a land spirit beast, Snowflake felt nervous and scared in the ocean. It moved closer to Jacob's feet and blinked in fear. The flight treasure moved quickly through the water. Shortly, it arrived at a magnificent underwater palace. South Atlantic Dragon Palace. These 4 characters were engraved above the main gate. Jacob had never been to the South Atlantic Dragon Palace before. Looking down at the palace, he realized that the size of the South Atlantic Dragon Palace was twice the size of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. There were so many buildings in the palace that they seemed endless, and Jacob wondered if they had overestimated themselves. Could only the two of them cause trouble for the South Atlantic Dragon Palace? Noah casually took out a black conch from his sleeve. He swung it on his finger, and the conch immediately grew to the length of his arm. He withdrew the flight treasure, and the red energy sphere disappeared with it. Jacob immediately put the water-repellent bead in his mouth, and the water hovered around him. Snowflake couldn't build energy spheres, and it didn't have a water-repellent bead. Therefore, it began to swim in the water. Its posture was ugly, but it was a spirit beast and wouldn't drown. "I'll go and arrange the core of the array formation. You just stay here and monitor the enemies for me." Noah handed the conch to Jacob. He then took out a silver cape and pulled it over him, disappearing immediately. Faint silver lights were flashing as Noah moved to a spot hundreds of meters away from the palace and planted a small flag into the ground. Then, he moved to another spot and planted another small flag. Jacob looked around alertly while keeping an eye on Noah as well. Suddenly, he felt like a thief, about to pull off some big robbery. "Damn South Atlantic, the palace's defense walls are too long for my flags. Okay, I'll only bomb half of the palace and destroy the other half next time." A few minutes later, Noah swam back to Jacob and cursed angrily. He gritted his teeth and said to Jacob, "I'll arrange the array formation and you apply the nature essence. I'll let you control the destructive lightning conch." Jacob now realized that he was invited here not as a mere witness. As Jacob looked at him in a daze, Noah frowned. "The destructive lightning conch is too powerful for me to control. You are on the 3rd level, so you can use 1/10 of this conch's power. I'll burn them out of their wits," Noah added as he lightly rubbed his cheeks. Since he lived by the principle an eye for an eye, Noah would make South Atlantic pay dearly. "Golden sand array." Noah made a hand gesture, and the flags buried near the Dragon Palace lit up instantly. It seemed that the guards had detected the situation, and a bunch of them flew toward the golden flags like a flood. "If you don't want to get captured, beat them with me. Fill it with metal elemental essences," Noah urged Jacob. Okay. Jacob didn't have any sympathy for the South Atlantic Dragon Clan, so he immediately activated his metal elemental essences and injected it into the conch in his hand. Since Noah was confident in himself, Jacob guessed that this treasure wouldn't be lame. Jacob felt like all the metal elemental essences in his body were suddenly sucked out by the black conch, and its force was so violent that it almost sucked his whole arm in. The moment the array formation was activated, yellow sand grains from an area with a diameter of 100 kilometers flew toward the South Atlantic Dragon Palace and engulfed it. The scouting team that came out to investigate was instantly buried in the yellow sand. The solid signboard with South Atlantic Dragon Palace on it was blown to the ground. A dozen or so purple-robed elders tried to push out of the palace, but they were knocked back by the yellow sand. These sand grains were not ordinary, since they contained wind and lightning power. If cultivators touched any of them, their cultivation strength would start diminishing like quicksand. If they had the sand blown into their flesh, their meridians would be blocked, and it would be excruciating if they tried to activate their nature essence. The purple-robed elders at the front of the group got the sands blown into their ears. Immediately, their senses were damaged. They couldn't see or hear anymore. Sensing the power of the sand, the following elders hurriedly pulled the injured elders into the Dragon Palace. The South Atlantic Dragon Palace had the main gate, but it didn't have a roof on top. The surging yellow sand flew over the walls and entered the palace. The yellow sand grains with hidden wind and lightning power began to run wild in the palace. Like daggers, they shattered the golden glazed tiles in the buildings and cut deeply into the solid red beams and pillars. The orderly South Atlantic Dragon Palace was instantly messed up. The cultivators of South Atlantic didn't know who was attacking them, so a pale blue defense array formation was activated to protect the South Atlantic Dragon Palace. "You try to play with array formations in front of a master?" Noah snorted. "Berserk Ice Array, half metal elemental essence and half water elemental essence." Jacob placed the other hand on the conch and injected a surge of pure water elemental essence. Noah picked up a red flag and waved it slightly. Under his calm demeanor, he was excited and thought, "This silent Jacob has such stable and firm cultivation strength. He looks gentle but is vicious in action. I like it." The flags that were placed around the palace lit up again. Tens of thousands of fist-sized ice spikes formed. The ice spikes that contained wind and lightning power were the perfect weapons to break the water elemental array formation of the South Atlantic Dragon Palace. The pale blue light array formation began to crack instantly. After 2 seconds, the array formation collapsed and the ice spikes struck holes on the roofs of the magnificent buildings that were inside the South Atlantic Dragon Palace. Snowflake was excited at the sight. It swam around Jacob as if it was encouraging him to work harder. "Your mastery of the 5 elemental technique is great." Noah looked back at Jacob and praised him. Then he looked forward at the South Atlantic Dragon Palace and gritted his teeth. "You dared to hit me. This is what you get for what you did to me 10 days ago. Under the attack of my Super Destroyer Killer Array formation, you'll crawl out with tears." He waved his flag again. "Burning Fire Array.